Good morning, everyone. Good morning. That's better. That's brilliant. And it's fantastic to welcome colleagues, comrades and friends from across the Labour family to Newcastle and the Centre for Life, which is the world-class investment in science and our future that the last Labour government made. Yes, we can go there. I want to confirm that whilst the sun may not be shining quite as much as we like here in Newcastle, that's still no excuse to put a coat on. And I'd also like to clear up a controversy that has been dogging the party for some time now, dividing us, causing disagreements in public and in the chamber of the House of Commons. And I think it's particularly important that I do this now, whilst John McDonnell is in the room, as well as my colleagues from across the North East, Andy McDonnell, Ian Mearns, Ian Lavery, Peter Dowd as well, I think Mary Glinden and Nick Brown and Emma Llewellyn Buck are also here. So not everyone is going to like this. But comrades, I am here to say that it was the North East that powered the Industrial Revolution. You know, literally, we're only a few yards from the Fourth Bank Works, where the world's first commercial locomotive, the Rocket, was built by Stephenson. And growing up in the shadow of Stephenson, Parsons, Armstrong, and other, just by the way, that's Rachel Parsons, the first woman marine engineer, not her father. But growing up in their shadow, as it were, was part of what inspired me to study electrical engineering as a young woman. You know, I felt that the two great engines of progress are engineering and technology and politics. And I've been lucky enough to work in both. And we're only a few hundred yards from the glorious Mining Institute, and any of you who are not familiar with it, I really recommend you go there. It was built in the 18th century to use science, medicine, and engineering to make mining better and safer. Because don't forget that before inventing the locomotive, Stephenson invented the world's first miner's safety lamp. But because he was an illiterate miner, the Metropolitan London elite, as I believe they were known at the time, gave the accolade to someone called Davy instead. So as well as powering the Industrial Revolution, the North East has always played a huge role in the great social justice movements, from the Jarrow March, Fair Trade, to the cooperative movement, and indeed our own Labour movement, the Labour family. And I hope that all the Mancunians, the Glaswegians, the Brummies, the Scousers who are in the room now, and a very warm welcome to all of you. But I hope you will agree with me that Newcastle is the perfect place to debate and decide our new economics. Because, of course, as well as witnessing the heights of British industry, we've also seen the lows. The North East suffered hugely under Thatcher's forced deindustrialisation. And no one who lived here, as I did in the 80s, will ever forget that combination of neglect and malice which destroyed our economic livelihood. And since then, successive Conservative governments have been obsessed with cutting, deregulating and reducing the size of the state. And we know what the result has been: the loss of hundreds of thousands of jobs, the disastrous financialisation of our economy, which has left wages and productivity behind in a quest for investor profits at all costs. And more recently, the rise of the precarious zero-hour contracts and pseudo-self-employment. And I call that the Uberization of our economy. And I'm proud of what Labour did to reverse and cushion these trends. We introduced the minimum wage to ensure that work pays. We placed a premium on education to ensure young people had the skills to enter the workforce, and we funded public services properly. I went to Kenton School. It was rebuilt under Labour. Our NHS was saved under Labour, and we invested heavily in our great towns and cities, like here, to restore a sense of civic pride, as well as setting up the regional development agencies to help our regions flourish. But time has shown that many of our reforms were too fragile in the face of Tory austerity. And we didn't do enough to change the economic model of our country, which continued to be dominated by finance and so vulnerable to the crisis of 2008. Since Thatcher, we've seen a real absence of public debate about the structure of our economy. Too often our future has been seen as something to be determined by investors, financial speculators, and Whitehall mandarins, not people on the streets of Newcastle and Sunderland and Middlesbrough. And while it was the Labour government that rescued the banks and our economy 10 years ago, this lack of a debate continued even while the neoliberal economic model was in crisis. You know, I was an engineer when the 2008 economic crisis happened, and I had a very good job and a very good salary, but I can't have been the only one who felt betrayed by economics and economists. Casino capitalism had collapsed, dragging down working people and public services, and yet there seemed to be no voices saying, you know, that it doesn't have to be this way. So let's say it now. It doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be this way. No, it doesn't have to be this way. In the years of coalition and now the Tory government, we have too often felt powerless, told repeatedly that there is no alternative to destructive austerity. Well, it doesn't have to be this way. You know, and now this is not going to be popular, but I do think we have to give credit where it's due, even to Tories. So George Osborne has finally succeeded in creating high-wage, high-skilled jobs. For himself, of course. 6 of them, 6. But it was his economic policies which did much to feed the discontent with politics. And one of the many things which makes me angry are the commentators who blame the negative effects of Brexit, the rise in hate crimes, and let's acknowledge that, the paralysing economic uncertainty, but they blame it on the northern working class, those left behind by globalisation. I am so tired of southern commentators blaming everything on the northern working class. And it's especially ironic, given that the Brexit revolution was led by a Surrey stockbroker and an old Etonian. But we should recognise the powerlessness felt by many that drove the vote for Brexit and for Trump across the Atlantic, and that was caused by an economic model which prevents people from living their true potential. Because living standards have slid and are continuing to slide. Between 2007 and 2015, the UK was the only big advanced economy in which wages fell while the economy grew. In France and Germany, both the economy and the wages have grown. And now the government defends its record on the grounds that it has created jobs. So basically they say employment is high and stagnant wages are the trade-off. But that's a false choice. It says you can either have many people in low-paid, low-security, low-productivity jobs, or a few people in high-wage, high-security, high-productivity jobs. What about a high-wage, high-skill economy? You know, we could call that Oh, I don't know. We could call that an economy which works for all. And that's not what we have right now. 1 in 8 workers, so people working for a living, 1 in 8 of them are in poverty. 1 in 8 people who work are poor. And that's abhorrent on moral grounds, but it's also an unnecessary drain on our economy. And that's why the government is deeply misguided if it believes that in-work poverty is a natural consequence of jobs growth. Now, when Theresa May started talking about a new active role for the state, I can't have been the only one who thought she was parking her tanks on our turf. Because Sajid Javid, Cameron and Osborne, their stiff upper lips could not even pronounce the words industrial and strategy together. But unfortunately, unfortunately for the economy, I say, Theresa May can talk the talk, but she doesn't walk the walk. The government's green paper on industrial strategy, and I think you should look at that, though obviously I recommend our consultation on industrial strategy, which is much, much better. Theirs was published 3 weeks after ours. It had no vision. It had 10 pillars, but no vision. You couldn't see the wood for the pillars, indeed. And even the editor of the Telegraph, free marketeer Alistair Heath, I'll just quote this. He said, "The government's industrial strategy green paper is little more than show business with a sprinkling of activity. It's glitzy, it talks the talk, but will change almost nothing when it comes to the government's relationship to the economy." So that is a right-wing commentator. And opting for showbiz over strategy is the reason why our economy is facing such a hard shock today. Greg Clark talks about cultivating the industries of the future, but he's privatizing the Green Investment Bank, which will cut off a key source of finance for UK businesses. The deal for Nissan was great. It was great news for the region and everyone who worked there. But now we see that Nissan's commitment is in doubt, with the government's reckless rhetoric on Brexit leading their CEO to say its investment is under review. And I don't think that is acceptable for this region or for the workers who work here. And not everyone works for a company that can get a special deal on the table, which is why we need a clear and positive vision for our economic future, with clear funded policies so that people, communities and businesses have the certainty that they need. And that is what we are working on. As a Shadow Minister for Industrial Strategy, we are working to create the vision and the policies that can deliver it for a high-wage, high-growth economy that provides working people with the jobs and the skills they need to succeed. As innovation economist Mariana Mazzucato argues, it's a false choice between market and state. Instead, genuine industrial and technological progress needs to be guided by a long-term vision that mobilizes both public and private investment. So only Labour can create what Mazzucato calls the entrepreneurial state, a bold, risk-taking government that stands shoulder to shoulder with businesses in the creation of new jobs and industries. So our industrial strategy is led by the big challenges of our time, from decarbonising the economy to caring for an ageing population. It's challenge-led. And it's also mission-orientated, because rather than taking a scattergun approach to sectors, and the government's green paper talks about sectors, picks a few sectors, doesn't look at the economy as a whole, where we will orientate our work around key missions, such as decarbonising our energy production by 60% by 2030. But most importantly, the strategy is driven by Labour values. meaning that it's Labour values which will help us make the tough calls when it comes to our economy. Now, for example, some say it's inevitable that new technology will give elite individuals more wealth and freedom, whilst everyone else is increasingly controlled by algorithmic management and digital surveillance. And Trump backer in Silicon Valley billionaire Peter Thiel, whose PayPal would not exist without the once government-sponsored internet and investment by the American government. But in any case, he supports the idea of the most talented individuals moving to floating seaborne cities off the coast of California so they do not have to pay any taxes or muck around with the rest of us mortals. But actually, that sounds a bit like Philip Hammond's Brexit plan. But seriously, I just want to emphasize that that is the kind of choice that is being faced when we talk about economic decisions in the new economy. There are those who want to take us in a complete direction, and they're in this government, of a low tax. When you talk about a race to the bottom, that's the kind of bottom that we're looking at. And it's a vision that the Labour Party absolutely rejects. Our party is about the value of labour and the people whose labour it is, seeing value in people rather than just the economic surplus they produce. And it's these values which will shape the economy we want to deliver. We are creating a truly inclusive industrial strategy. The Conservative government's Green Paper did not mention diversity once. But diversity is not simply, or not only, a question of social justice, but it is. It is a question of social justice, but it's not only that. It's an economic imperative. For an economy which is resilient, which doesn't depend on the perspective of a small group of people who all went to the same school and all benefited from the same privilege. A diverse, resilient, sustainable, smart economy is the only way we can deliver for British people. Now, we're hard at work at that. And I said earlier that Newcastle was the perfect place to discuss these new economics in these strange times. Who would have thought 2 years ago, in the run-up to the 2015 election, that the then Chancellor would be a newspaper editor, editing the Evening Standard, and the then Shadow Chancellor, a much more successful professional dancer. So, unlike the Tory Northern powerhouse, which ends with George Osborne's constituency, which of course is now going to be London, our vision is a whole economy, whole country one. And that's why our Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer is taking the economic debate across the country. And it's absolutely essential that the new economic structure, the new economic system is designed and developed by the people who are going to make it work and not out of Whitehall. Because, as I said earlier, there is another way.